Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, and in this example, my bad Windows 11 install was a little bit faster than the good install, so go figure. Well, truth be told, the data is within the margin of error, and the good news is, with the patch applied, 23H2 is now matching the performance of 24H2. So we're looking at an 8% performance uplift here. It's also interesting to note that prior to the patch, Windows 11 and Windows 10 were delivering the same or very similar performance. The Watch Dogs Legion results are very similar to that of Cyberpunk in the sense that the two Windows 11 installs are very similar, and prior to the patch performance is on par with Windows 10. We're looking at up to a 10% performance boost here with the patch, so the same uplift seen with 24H2. So again, Windows 10 will need an update here to match Windows 11. For testing Far Cry 6, we aren't using the built-in benchmark, as it's not a very good CPU test. Now, what we are seeing here is that prior to the update, Windows 11 was broken in this example, though the degree to how broken it is may vary. Our bad install only averaged 162 FPS, while the good install allowed for 171 FPS. After patching, performance was much closer between the two Windows 11 installs, and both were slightly faster than what we saw on 24H2. Essentially, we saw anywhere from a 13 to 17% performance uplift with the patch, depending on how broken Windows 11 was prior to the update. It's also interesting to note that Windows 10 works fine here, matching the performance seen with 24H2. Now, the bad Windows 11 install was very bad in Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, especially when looking at 1% lows, and very poor 1% lows was something the initial hardware Linux testing suffered from. But even if we just look at the average frame rate, the good install is still 6% faster than the bad install, while the good install match what we see with Windows 10. What's really interesting here is that the patch fixed both the good and bad Windows 11 installs, boosting them to the same level of performance seen when using 24H2. But this means, whereas the patch improved the performance for the bad install by 14%, we're seeing just a 7% uplift for the good install. So depending on your starting point, the performance uplift can vary quite a bit. We also have another example where Windows 10 will need an update to match Windows 11. The Borderlands 3 results are pretty straightforward. Both Windows 11 installs delivered the same results, meaning the patch was good for a 12% uplift here, allowing the patch version of 23H2 to match that of 24H2, which is also the same performance you'll see on Windows 10. The Callisto protocol also indicates that there was something wrong with Windows 11 23H2 prior to the patch, though the degree to how broken it is will depend on the install. Our bad install averaged just 241 FPS, whereas the good install was 15% faster with 276 FPS, and again this is based on a 3-run average. But with the update we received a further 4% performance. Not a big gain by any means, but it means 23H2 is now on par with 24H2 and Windows 10. Previously, we didn't see big gains for 24H2 over 23H2 in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, but we did see some gains, and that remains true even for the good install of Windows 11, which saw a 6% uplift with the patch. Windows 10 performance is pretty close to the patched Windows 11 performance. At most, Windows 11 is now just 2% faster, which is within the margin of error. Now, F124 was another game where the initial install of Windows 11 was performing very poorly, just 394 FPS on average, which is obviously a lot, but also a lot less than where it should be, which was 418 FPS with the good install. That's a 6% increase. Even so, the patch improved performance by a further 9%, and what's really interesting is that the patch fixed both the good and bad installs of Windows 11. Allowing the performance to match that of the 24H2 build, making it slightly faster than Windows 10. The Rift Break is another game where my initial Windows 11 install, now labelled as bad install, was massively underperforming, rendering just 187 FPS. Meanwhile, the good install is 10% faster with 206 FPS, but even so, the patch will still improve performance by a further 5%. And remarkably was able to fix the performance for both Windows installs. Performance is now similar to that of 24H2, as well as Windows 10. Remnant 2 is another game where the previously tested Windows 11 install sucked, just 103 FPS on average, whereas the good install achieved 111 FPS, and that's an 8% increase. Now, once again, the patch seems to have fixed both Windows 11 installs, boosting them to a similar level seen by Windows 10. So it's around a 6% increase for the good install. Interestingly, the 24H2 install is still 7% faster, which is similar to what we saw in Hogwarts Legacy. We have another example in Star Wars Jedi Survivor, where the performance varies quite a bit between the Windows 11 installs that I've dubbed good and bad. Again, both systems are configured in the exact same way, yet what we're calling the good install is 7% faster when comparing the average frame rate to that of the bad install. And this means even the good install was still 8% faster with this patch applied, bringing Windows 11 up to the same level of performance seen from Windows 10. Again though, even with the patch, the 23H2 build is still a good bit slower than what we saw with 24H2. Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord saw just a 2.5% discrepancy between the good and bad installs, which means the patch resulted in a 5 to 7% performance uplift, allowing Windows 11 23H2 to match what I saw with 24H2. World War Z is another game where the bad Windows install is quite a bit slower than the good install, 7% slower in this example, but again the patch seems to correct both installations, and even in this example elevates them to the same level of performance seen with 24H2, which is a little faster than Windows 10. So even the good install still saw an 8% performance increase. Forza Horizon 5 is another game that previously didn't see a huge uplift, but there were still some decent gains on 24H2, 6% when compared to the bad install. The good install was just 2% faster, so just within the margin of error for run-to-run variants in this title, so we're only seeing a very minor improvement with the patch. Quite oddly, the bad Windows 11 install was straight up broken in Forza Motorsport. I've since gone back and popped that SSD in to check the results and found for whatever reason, this install averages just 167 FPS. Yet if I swap out for the good install, we're looking at 194 FPS, which means the update is only improving performance here by around 3%,